All right, welcome to a new episode of Cali Claptrap Integral Conversations. Today's guest is Brent Cooper. Brent, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Cool title.
Hey, thanks. So Brent is a political sociologist by training, mystic by nature, and rebel by choice. I met Brent some years ago on Twitter, I think, looking over some leftist politics, and we both into Bernie. But Brent, I was hoping you could maybe start a little bit about how I sort of see you as really like an intellectual in this sort of modern metamodern realm and stuff. But before we go there, can you talk a little bit about what led you to where you are today and how you got, intellectually curious about subject matters? And did you always kind of know growing up you were drawn to sort of, I don't want to call it the book life, but this was always sort of philosophy was something you were always drawn to?
Yes and no, in the sense that I don't think I ever had a natural aptitude for reading, and I still don't. But there is a sense in which it feels like a linear path, like it hasn't been, but
yeah.
I've kind of pursued an attractor, right? That has kept me on track, and various attractors. So metamodernism has been one of those attractors because it's been a word kind of in the academic space since like 2010, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always had my own ideas about it, but it served as an attractor, as something that I wanted to see become a kind of workable, publicly traded paradigmatic idea, right? Because through my education, like I was taught a lot of postmodernism, not in any strict way, because it's like, here's a massive reading list and it includes some stuff that says postmodern, right? So that literature is really all over the map. But I'd say, I started to go back to university in 2006, right? So that was five years after I'd finished high school. So it was a very kind of delayed start.
Mm-hmm.
But I was basically committed to this track of trying to pursue like the most intellectual, or the most like judicious or whatever kind of philosophy, right? Because you as a student, contrary to popular belief, you're not really indoctrinated or taught what to think. You're a ton of stuff is thrown at you, and you have to kind of parse it and survive it, and write exams and papers and prove that you're learning and you're challenging yourself. So I was really interested in like knowledge and power, and stuff like that, and elite mass relations and conspiracy theory. And I kept looking for ways academically to tie that together, right? So it was like international relations, sociology, political science. I've taken a few economics courses, as part of the package, but wouldn't call myself an economist, but learned enough to know that field, right, of economics is very, very contentious. There's a lot of fetishization in the models, in the math and stuff like that. And so, there's a lot of factors that encourage one to transdisciplinarity and to higher synthesis, for better or worse, right? But with postmodernism, you're getting a lot of interdisciplinarity, and that's good, but it reaches limits, right? There is some sort of barrier or threshold that you have to like push through, and it can take years of study to push through, and you never quite escape it. Like in this new Dispatches book that I'm in, for example, Daniel Gortz has a great chapter on metamodern sociology. And, he kind of foregrounds in that chapter that there's still a lot of work to be done, right? Like very few people are kind of intuitively taking this approach. So that's the short answer, I guess.
Yeah.
Like how we got from there to here.
Yeah. So when you say not intuitively taking this approach, what approach is that? Sort of the higher synthesis that you're talking about, as far as taking these different fields and trying kind of to make sense of them?
Yeah, like, I dig up a lot of papers, and any given paper, like a journal article type thing, like it'll be published in a particular subfield, and it'll be following particular norms, and it might just be boring or not have a broader point, but you have to kind of work through the convention of it
Mhm.
before you can get to any bigger picture. And some books and articles start with the bigger picture.
Yeah.
you know um
So did you, not to interrupt, if you were continuing, go ahead.
no, I'm
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, so, you kind of got on this and trying to piece together what you're saying here, trying to, get on this track of sort of, and so I think what do you think your intention is? I think some of it could be like, okay, are you like seeking like the ultimate truth, or do you think like maybe you're on to like a secret of maybe the conspiracy behind all the conventional sort of academic world? What do you think led you to seek out this attractor?
yeah, I mean, ultimate truth is definitely an attractor, but I don't think it's something we can ever reach.
Right.
But I'm not like a absolute relativist either. Like, I think we can, throughout our life get closer and further away from this. But I'd say more than ultimate truths, I'm really interested in basic truths, or
Mhm.
basic policy truths, and then how the entire discourse and legal framework, revolves around that in one way or another, right? So of course, a
Yeah.
classic example is like the war on drugs, because that's a nexus issue, right? It includes systemic racism, it includes, freedom of religion and healthcare and things like that. And the fact that, like, to a large extent, the war on drugs is still going, right? Just like slavery persisted and still exists in parts of the world, like, these things are still happening. So of course we have to ask why, not naively or facetiously, like
Yeah.
really get to the root of the problem. And just
Yeah.
so much of what we do through jobs and through particular disciplines is just reifying the structure, kind of just like skimming the surface, learning about it, but not really penetrating. And so there's so many ideological bad actors in the world, right? Like climate change, war on drugs, like, you don't have to be an intellectual, but it certainly helps, to
Mhm.
kind of gather all the evidence and have a confident view about these things. But so many people are just contrarians. It's
Mm.
like they just want to argue. They have a slightly nuanced, different perspective, and they just want to, derail the conversation. And ultimately, it usually becomes evident pretty quickly that they're in some kind of camp. Oh, they're a libertarian. Oh,
Mhm.
they're a reactionary.
Yeah.
And those can be multifaceted too. They don't have to be just like simplistic one dimensional camps, but
Yeah.
it's nevertheless, it's like, oh, you're hung up on market fundamentalism still. Like, if we're not going to get past that, like, and I can point to my debate with Brian O'Doherty,
Mm.
right? This one of these integral guys that
Mhm.
we cross paths from time to time, and Layman Pascal mediated that debate. But it just kept coming for him. It just kept coming back to like, well, I'm doing axiomatic thinking, right? Like everything kind of evolves from my core principle, which is market fundamentalism, as I would call it, right? As I called it to him. I'm like, like this is amateur hour. This is like high school stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I told him, like, you're a smart guy. You've written about panarchy and all this, but you're reproducing the ideology of like the Atlas Society, and these right-wing think tanks. It's like, dude,
Yeah.
face up to this contradiction. now, or,
Yeah.
get fucked.
Yeah. So Brent,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So I think one of the things I wanted to bring up is because, I am sort of aware of these sense-making communities that seem to be sort of talk about like multiple camps. Everyone, just thinking, and you've been on a lot of them, Game B, Jim Rhutt, the Stoa, Vervaeke, and so participating in these worlds. And I don't know if I kind of wanted to talk up, and I'm glad you caught up, the people that are being contrarians. I think you might even have some of the reputation of being like a troublemaker, but how do you see it to defend yourself that comes in here and maybe calls people, I think from you would say, call people on their bullshit, but also, you've created waves. How do you sit with that? Are you okay with that? Do you think you're misrepresented?
We're definitely not in the best of all possible worlds in that respect. Like I've taken risks and I've paid the price, and I don't think others have paid the price of their behaviors, their positions or their behaviors vis-a-vis me. So these things remain unresolved. But where do I stand on it? I'm relatively proud of my Jim Rhutt encounters, of my Stoa appearances. I did the best I could. I initiated a lot of those. Of course, I've got my own kind of theories of metamodernism and stuff, but that wasn't what I was there to present, right? And I'm happy to present those too. But to answer your question, I'm very inclined to call bullshit and to challenge people, and I do try to do that in relatively respectful ways. Yeah. But of course, one thing many of us agree on is that we're in some kind of a meta crisis and some kind of a time crunch. And if you look back on those interviews and contributions, which I don't think a lot of people are going back, there's so much content on a daily basis. It's like, why would you ever go back into the history? But I'm trying to set precedents, and Jim Rhutt and I, came to an agreement that, and this is kind of what I pitched to him, that like, look, we need to do this to like make ourselves look good, right? I'm trying to make him look good, and vice versa, because we were prone to trying to take each other down.
Yeah.
But the condition for opening that door from his end was that we couldn't talk about the critique. And so, that felt like a win to me, but a Pyrrhic victory. It's like, okay, these people are kind of backing off and conceding on these points insofar as they refuse to talk about it. Like, everybody's gaslighting me, saying that there's no argument there, or, okay, but I'm holding my ground. I'm saying there is an argument there, and there's evidence for quite a bit of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, right, like I said in the interview, like, I'm happy to push this aside for the moment so we can try to have a constructive dialogue. And it's hard for me because I do have to kind of bite the bullet, swallow my pride, because I do respect these people. I think Jim does have a large body of work. It's competitive. It's obviously he interviews a lot of people that I do like. I do agree with. But again, it's coming back to these basic truths, right? Like, and I hate sounding like a broken record. Like, I'm literally sick of this shit. But I have to say, like, because I called out Jim on the podcast, like, you had James Lindsay on. Like, how many fucking times do I have to say it? James Lindsay is a disreputable person. He's a pseudo scholar, right? His website, his new discourses, it looks like scholarship, but it's not. It's a bunch of reactionary pablum that really carries water for far right movements. So the extent to which he's part of those movements, or he just serves them as a useful idiot, that's a little bit of a semantic distinction that I don't think is as relevant as the fact that he's just wrong. He's just
Yeah.
wrong. So why the
Yeah.
fuck are people listening to him when he's wrong? Right. So this is, this goes back to rebel wisdom too. James Lindsay's never been on the Stoa, thank God. Like I think Peter does have some boundaries and some sort of like radar and scope for bad actors, but a lot of people I think are bad actors have been on the Stoa. So we're just kind of circling the drain for years here, right? And to come back to how you and I know each other, it is through the Bernie movement and through Jeremy. And with a lot of these people, that stuff's just off the table. Like you can't even talk about it because it leads in to all sorts of other issues,
Well, to bring it back to kind of, and I'm glad you addressed that. Thank you. To talk about your constructivist sort of movement and where you're trying to go with it. You talked a little bit about, I'm not sure if I misheard you, but you mentioned Daniel Gortz earlier, and he's like co-author with the Hansi Project and stuff. Does your metamodernism differ from his vision? Is it kind of aligned, or what is your metamodern vision that you're hoping to put forward and be sort of the main issue of discussion?
Yeah, it's pretty aligned. I'd say 90 to 99%. This is the thing. Like I don't want to be a contrarian. That's what I criticize in other people. I'm very aligned with their project. And we're all like the same age. Daniel has a PhD, so he's like more mature than me sociologically, let's say. And they've produced the books, right? Like I've produced a similar amount of content, but it's not edited, it's not published, it's just out there, right? And so I respect their project, right? They've done something that has a lot of integrity and a lot of power in the theory, and it's regrettable actually that more people aren't reading it and taking it up. And so there's a lot more I could say about that, right? About the differences, but the other side of the coin is what is my metamodernism. And so, I'd say it goes back 10 years, just sort of in the work I was doing, but it wasn't super explicit. In 2012, I did include the word in a book proposal I was writing, to just to say that like it's very much a reconstructive project as opposed to deconstructive. And so at the root, I'd say 10 years ago, my vague formations of it, they were compatible with what Vermeulen and Van den Akker were doing, but mine was much more sociologically rooted. And it's sort of like what that was destined to evolve into is kind of what I'm doing now. And kind of like what the Hansi Project is, like something that does the work of parsing modernism and postmodernism, not in any simplistic way, but like really problematizing these concepts and unpacking them. Mine takes elements from these other ones, but also kind of, I think kind of springs forth from a different moral or a different ethic, a different epistemology. So, coming back to political sociology, and Daniel is also a political sociologist, but for me, it's about knowledge and power, which the way those things are written about is informative, but it kind of coming into the 21st century, everything kind of falls off a cliff. But I look at the history, right? So in Vermeulen and Van den Akker, they talk about alter globalization. And I think that's the starting point for me, right? And that's so I studied globalization, and it's fascinating, capacious concept, but there's, it's contested, right? And it's important to foreground that. And so it's a bit of a mystery what's really going on. Like, is there some sort of global conspiracy for world domination? Like, not really, but there's elements of it, right? Like there's the Panama Papers and now the Pandora Papers. Like I'm not even read up on this yet, but it's just like a meme. It's like, oh yeah, of course there's like, global money laundering and tax evasion and
Yeah.
corruption. It's like, so yeah, alter globalization, it's in the theories, but it's underutilized, right? So this is why I foreground it to say, like, look, we have the 90s, the end of the Cold War, the kind of that was more of an in-between period than we're in today, in a sense. And then 9/11, but before that, 1999, the WTO protests, right? That's like the textbook example of alter globalization. And then from there, you can kind of catalog the 20 years of history of this century that we've been through, and nobody's really done that yet. And I'm trying to do it, but I'm very behind schedule because it's like it's a mega project, right? And like more scholars should be working on the same thing, so we'd be able to produce consensus and impacts, and turns and paradigm shifts, right? And just to close out this point, like I'm reading Jason Storm's book on metamodernism. It's a new book, and on one page he recounts 31 turns like that have been proposed over the past 50 years, like, well, a semantic turn, a cultural turn, global turn. And I've come across a lot of these, right? But it's fascinating because he's doing a metamodern scholarly move, I think, which is to kind of zoom out without losing too much resolution and look at all these factors, look at all these turns, right? Like, what is it really saying? So he's kind of abducting from that, and I think I think it can make an impact to see that big picture.
One of the things too, I kind of think you kind of put your stake in the ground or your flag in is about sort of leftist politics. So again, I'm not even familiar with who James Lindsay is, but is he wrong just because he's on the right? And how do you sort of see, like, because I think when you're looking at the deeper picture, you start to see, and I think what unites us as far as our Bernie politics, even how Bernie was kind of shut out from the Democratic Party, was, this idea of sort of democratic power, economic power, more to the masses kind of a thing. And anyone, I think you kind of maybe look at what the sources of the problems are. A lot of it comes down to sort of this unequal wealth distribution and the causes of capitalism on the earth. So politically, I also see you are okay being in the leftist camp and sort of, but do you come to that camp from an intellectual perspective, and why? Or if so, why?
Yeah, I think I've always been a leftist, but reflecting on my entire history, I noticed so many objects or events that aren't necessarily left, and they can pull a person in those directions without them knowing. And just very quickly, like a classic example is Batman. Like, I used to love Batman as one of my favorite superheroes, for obvious reasons. Like it just appeals to a lot of kind of caveman desires for men especially. But like, when I started to hear just the like critiques and like really simple kind of observations, like he's a Batman is a right-wing kind of wet dream, kind of super rich libertarian, like he's not investing in systemic change. And so I mean, this just became more and more obvious as I studied these things. But it's disorienting to be a leftist. Like I think, obviously, coming back to your intellectual question, there's a lot of intellectuals on the left, right? Like whether it's Noam Chomsky or Norman Finkelstein, or like, people who have this lifelong legacy of like lucidly and calmly speaking against the establishment, speaking against apartheid, speaking against occupations. It's really, again, basic truths, right?
Yeah.
And the left, this is a global phenomenon, part of alter globalization, right? They have a kind of socialist international, but the flip side of that is that like leftist intellectuals get assassinated and disappeared a lot, right? Like we want to talk about the different statistics on the left and right, like, you know, mass shooters, right-wing phenomenon, right? Public intellectual, left-wing phenomenon, right? I don't really think there's an equivocation there, but they're often left and right thinkers come together and debate, and it's some sort of event. But, you know, I don't think that reflects the underlying truth. So where am I going with this?
I guess my question to kind of, you know, pull it out a little bit is to I mean, you know, I guess I don't know if we want to tie in stage theory and people coming from different kind of perspectives on the world. You know, when I think of someone, obviously my views, political views, and again, it's more of a is it possible to separate the political and the intellectual? Because often the political becomes just this biased sort of beat down camp where they're just left right views, and you see these typical debates and they don't go anywhere. Both are more entrenched in their positions. But intellectually, I mean, how does metamodernism, what is their proposal to come in and hopefully solve this sort of divide? Because I think everyone could agree on both camps. You see, we're just further apart. So does metamodern have some sort of secret solution up their sleeve that they can propose to have both camps sort of understand, like, okay, you know, integral, or at least Wilber's, you know, perspective, and it's more maybe a spiral dynamics thing, and not to go too far into that sort of rabbit hole, but like there's different stages and we go through them. And so people that are on the right are maybe more the ethnocentric, and left are more pluralistic. And so it's just different camps, and in your growth and development, you're just kind of naturally going to be there. What is metamodern sort of, you know, and I'm hoping through all the constructive dialogue that these different kind of sense-making camps are having, the goal is to ultimately kind of resolve maybe some differences, or maybe I'm all about where are we going, and how does metamodern, if it does, present maybe a solution to have a better perspective on these divisions.
Yeah, it's very complicated in the sense that, you know, there's a path dependence, a very strong path dependence to the status quo and to political identities. So, and you know, political identities are very reflexive, and I don't mean that necessarily in a good way. Like reflexivity is when you can, you know, take in new information and adapt and evolve to it, and integrate. So there's positive connotations, but you know, like there's this you know, reaction, like if the right gains more power or the left gains more power, then the other side, you know, takes more extreme measures, and they, you know, there's a lot of sideways movement in gaining more power, a lot of manipulation. And you know, one of these core ideas I've had for a long time is that, like, the world is a kind of systemic conspiracy, and so there is an enormous amount of like manipulation and kind of indoctrination and pacification of populations, like to be complacent. And so, you know, the energy gets captured, like it doesn't, it's just a tug of war. I think a tug of war is a good metaphor. Like it doesn't go anywhere if the sides are of equal strength. And even if it does, then you have a situation where one side wins and the other side falls flat on their face, right? And so, you know, I don't want to be a leftist. Like, I don't want to be a partisan. And you know, this point has been made clear by so many people on the left. Like they feel like they're showing up out of obligation, right? Again, to speak on behalf of climate change or to speak against the war on drugs. You know, again, really basic stuff. And I just wanted to quickly tie it back into James Lindsay. I mean, he's not really an important person, but he is influential relatively, and he's part of the intellectual dark web sphere, right? And that's a bigger enterprise and something I've critiqued and tried to map out. And you know, it's this hypocritical reactionary force, like a bunch of like successful liberal white men, you know, kind of like tacitly colluding, emerging to defend reason, defend science, right? All these abstractions that aren't actually under attack from the left, right?
Yeah.
Like so
Make it up for there to be something, it seems like most of the time, right? Like I forgot which one I heard the other day, but it's just like they pull the most randomest stuff to make it this, you know, mountains out of molehills kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like bigger issues need to be, but I don't know, it seems to you know, sort of make that group more cohesive. I'm not sure if that's a thing that you've discovered, but I also want to note your attack on the intellectual dark web was wonderful, because I think when I first met you, I was even unaware that thing was even going on. And
oh yeah,
your goals were wonderful.
Well, I think I brought it up too, because where I want to go with it is like I don't think I made this point in writing, but it occurs to me like I mean I kind of did to say like I get where they're coming from, because I used to be a Sam Harris fan, right? So I get it. I've got that qualification to get it. And I'll add to that by saying like I'm also a vulnerable man. And so I get what the appeal is of the, you know, that there is sexism in the intellectual dark web and all this kind of, and it's related to the alt-right kind of Gamergate type stuff. And, you know, the main IDW people will deny this vigorously, like Eric Weinstein, you know, very flippantly denied a report called the Alternative Influence Network that basically mapped out the YouTube connections between these guys and far right people, far right trolls, right? Many of which like directly overlap. Like how many of these trolls have been on Dave Rubin's show, right? It's like the platform for that circus. And so I'm trying to say like, I get it where the confusion, where the desperation comes from to link up with this movement, right? And you know, Eric said it as a joke, but it was clearly a kind of serious joke, insofar as like, you know, it was always something he could kind of opt out of as soon as it got like too reactionary. But it was reactionary from the very start, right? And the fact, so it comes back to like, it doesn't the fact that it's a joke doesn't exonerate him, because it's a bad joke. He's sitting on Dave Rubin's show, you know, kind of, you know, glamorizing, sanitizing this public pseudo intellectual project and crystallizing it, right? And as I say in my first article about it, like there's a history there. Like Big Think even had an article, like 5 major events leading up to the intellectual dark web, right? So
yeah.
So, you know, I tried to relate to people and be like, I get it, you know, but like that, you know, that relation and my critiques, like none of it really broke through. And also just broadly speaking, like there was and there is a kind of loose consensus on the left about these things, right? So it creates a pretty salient boundary between what I'm calling left politics and these liberal left-leaning people associating with centrist and far-right people to, you know, and they're calling themselves the reasonable left. You know, Brett Weinstein calls himself the reasonable left and says what they're doing is responsible conspiracy theorizing. And I'm so sick of it all, right? But again, it's like, it's not something I can escape or really want to escape, because it needs to be confronted head on, because I have to believe that we're getting somewhere with it. There's some kind of tipping point
Mm-hmm.
when just as there's tipping points of people getting radicalized to the right off of a cliff.
Yeah.
I want to, as I believe Bernie Sanders kind of did, radicalize people to the left, which is actually, in actuality, in the next paradigm, kind of the new center. And I use that term with some caveats, because the current center is defunct. It's still this third way neoliberal, like really just like a kind of like centrist mashup of different biases and ideas that happen to be compatible, right, to preserve the status quo. And so, you know, the centrists, if they remain in a kind of powerful position with public discourse and with policy, like we'll continue to have like Biden's and Joe Manchin's and Kristen Sinema's, like we're just wasting fucking time. Like, why can't we stack the entire team with actually progressive people, right? And so it comes back to all the systemic factors that on a day-to-day basis reify the world as it is, you know, like we really have to like intellectually break free of these molds.
So this kind of my final question, more of a personal question. Obviously I kind of got, you know, my background is more into integral and more basically like a spiritual perspective. Like one of the reasons I like sort of even leftist politics, Bernie's politics, is because, you know, my whole idea is how do you alleviate suffering? And I really do think there's a spiritual mission there on what he's doing. Like there's a very tangible, direct downflow from if those policies got sort of in place and stuff. And so for me, I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about, you know, with your own, you know, spiritual beliefs. Does it tie in, or do you not identify spiritually? What are your spiritual beliefs, if you don't mind sharing them?
Yeah. So first I'll try to tie it into the IDW again, because I did kind of go through this new atheist phase.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to, you know, there's lots to critique about that for sure, but I want to defend it a little bit because it was in the context of actually confronting right-wing fundamentalism.
Yeah.
And that's really a serious project, right? And like, so you have, you know, whether it's Mike Pence or George W. Bush, or, you know, like they're theocratic to an extent. And, you know, we can argue about whether it's a performance or whatever, but it doesn't fucking matter because the voters are buying it. That's what they're voting for. And so, you know, there's a lot of naivete in new atheism. Like I am quite spiritual and I like the synthetic approaches and kind of you know, world religions, cosmopolitan approaches to spirituality. And yeah, actually the big question of God, the theism versus atheism debates could never solve it because it's a poor frame. And I realized this in 2008, you know, and I attended a debate. I think the debate was actually put on by a Christian group, right? And a Christian campus organization. And they were much larger than our little secular freethinkers group, right? But nevertheless, this event was put on. But it was, like I said, you know, kind of set up to fail. And you know, to some extent, kind of a fraud to begin with, because the theist guy, you know, super weird guy, but, you know, PhD, you know, he's qualified to talk to some extent. But, you know, as part of the event, they gave out this little booklet, and the booklet included quotes that like pro-theism quotes from people like Albert Einstein, right? Famous pantheist and famous socialist. And they're using him to make a pro-God quote, a point. And Bertrand Russell, I'm like, what the fuck is this garbage propaganda? Like, it's just not true. It's disingenuous. It's a vicious abstraction. So, you know, and the way to transcend that debate is like you have syntheism and entheism and pantheism. These are much more rich theological concepts in the first place. So yeah, and then so tying it into politics, right? There's a lot of,
Yeah.
People lament that leftists aren't doing a good enough job to bring in spirituality, and maybe that's true, but historically it's not true. Of course, you have Martin Luther King, and a lot of activists have a kind of religious kind of kind of filter, or kind of motivation. And there you can have a kind of political read of Jesus as a socialist if you want.
Yeah.
And so tying it into the new atheism thing, like I was always critical of establishment religion, and I think that's important, but it's also important to understand its path dependence and what function it's performing, real or not. And my chapter in this Dispatches book is quite spiritual in its implications, right? Like metanoia is the concept, and it comes from the Bible, but I'm extracting it beyond that context. And so I don't want to be a martyr. let me just get that out of the way. But you sometimes you don't choose to be a martyr, you just choose the path, and then the world makes you a martyr. But tying it back to your setup about taking care of people and systems change, like that's what contemporary left politics is about. And in order to do that, we need a paradigm shift, which means a massive kind of coordinated shift in thinking about this, right? So that we can actually start to push through the policies, like actually as we're speaking, right? These things are on the table with the infrastructure bill and whatnot. Like the socialists want to do massive investment in infrastructure and in demilitarization, and essentially transition. Over the next 10 years, we need to transition from one kind of baseline system to another, right? And so the culture war we're experiencing that is literally obstructing that process, it falls back on really dated, really anti-intellectual talking points, right? Like, oh, critical race theory is racist, right? This is another thing that like Game B, specifically Jim Rhutt, but like I'm incriminating the entire group for this. But like Jim Rhutt explicitly banned critical race theory, and this was a year to a year and a half in advance of this year's moral panic and hysteria over this concept, and all the ink that's been spilled talking about critical race theory, right? Like it's insane, because the right wingers are in bad faith, regardless of what they think. It is bad faith because they're abusing this body of scholarship, they're misinforming the publics and stirring up kind of controversy and animosity, right? And it all just takes us backwards. So I'm trying to feel and promote a sense of spiritual solidarity, like that really deflates all of this political posturing, because literally it's just getting in the way of basic truths, basic healthcare, basic education. And so, I realized these things throughout my education and beyond, kind of self-education and working in these spaces. So that's the mission, right? If anybody wants to claim any type of faith or integrity, like this is where it goes. This is what God, so to speak, wants us to do. God doesn't want us. God doesn't want anti-vaxxers going around harassing normal people, and whatnot. It's like, but the root of that is the kind of epistemic crisis that those people, and we can't, it's hard to make generalizations, right? Like a lot of these things cut across demographics to some extent, but as we're touching on, you could have very educated people take very ideological reactionary positions. But nevertheless, the underlying meta crisis is one of knowledge deprivation, of epistemic kind of food deserts. So, there's a lot of misinformation in the world. People just aren't getting it by and large, right? Like trying to, and that's not to say like you need to have a blind faith in what is the kind of spearhead of the progressive agenda. Like I hate big pharma. I think there's a lot of research to back that up, and that we can have a whole thesis and discussion about that. Nevertheless, they're the ones like in partnership with governments and whatnot, doing the research, producing the vaccines. Like there's no other way to get this done. And I'm not saying like it only is going to get done under capitalism. No, I'm saying that it's going to get done either way, and that we need to, tentatively place our trust in that instead of projecting malice onto every actor, world leader, and whatnot.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, again, we need to get rid of the centrist kind of waffling, placating leaders like Obama or Justin Trudeau, because to tie it back to metamodernism, I'm trying to foreground a kind of leftist baseline and consensus, and we can include some conservative principles in there, out of necessity, let's say, and out of counterpoint, but not the ideological baggage, not the bullshit coming from the right. There's no equivocation between the various positions on the political spectrum. There is a common sense out there to be fostered and to be operationalized, right? But we live in a world where we're really dumbed down under capitalism, and we're offered all sorts of sugary snacks, whether it's food or kind of content.
Yeah. And yet some people fight through and are able to get perspectives like you do, right? And so I guess what I want to do, where you were kind of going is talking about, like, I think if God was active, using that sort of perspective and stuff, the cause you're taking on and being the champion of, I think also I agree with you that this is where the fight is, right? It's against protecting those who can't protect themselves. And you really see this regressive movement on the spiritualist part to kind of take up these causes that would only further the suffering, in my opinion, and stuff. Brent, I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and for being the champion you are of these causes. I am looking forward to see you continue to battle them on the track you are, and hopefully to bring more people to understand sort of, we are in a time crunch. There is a lot happening right now. And I will share with my listeners your links to where to find you, because I think your work is very on the forefront of where we need to go. And thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And you do great work too. And just talking and interviewing is a big part of that. And I'm still trying to up level in that regard and produce the content people need. And there's a ton of great leftist content out there, right? It's actually, there's so much that it's hard to fill the niches. Nevertheless, this is the movement. We need to kind of recruit people and not let it be taken over. We need to hold fast to those basic truths and basic values about healthcare, education, climate change, whatnot. So thanks for bringing it out of me.
It seems so simple, but yet there's some people that don't want to take up those causes. And so I appreciate you being the figurehead, at least in my eyes, a lot of not afraid to take up the battle and throw a few friendly punches here and there. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks, Brent.